Okay, welcome everyone to Records Management and Open Records Training. We are so excited to have you here. And this is the last time I'm going to be speaking like this because it doesn't fit me. Anyway, thank you so much, you guys, for coming. Amanda and I, over the last few weeks, I have to preface this first is I am probably the luckiest city employee in the city because I have had my replacement working with me now for 8 months. No. In fact, most city employees, when they go into a new job, the previous employee has been gone for 8 months. So I am really lucky to have had Amanda working with me, and I have to tell you, this city is in such good hands. Amanda is amazing. So anyway, we were talking the other day, many times, about records management and grandma requests and open records. And I told her, this year has been an anomaly. We have had so many grandma requests this year, haven't we, Camille? And Camille is, for those of you who don't know, this is Camille. She's the legal advisor for our grandma requests. And so usually we copy her on all our requests. And it's been a crazy year. And then we've also had different people asking, well, how long am I supposed to keep these papers? And how long do I have to keep them? And so Amanda and I were talking, and we decided, what we should do is have a training for all of the people in the departments who actually control the records, who handle the records, who handle grandma requests. And so I apologize for the timing. I realize it's close to the holidays. And with Provo 360 and the conversion going on, it's really busy. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to spend this time with us. So we will make it as quick and painless as possible. So first of all, welcome to Records Management and Open Records, Open Government Training. So what is records management? And what is open government? Does anybody know? Come on, talk to me. Records management. You do, generally here in redevelopment, has done a lot of records management, haven't you? And basically what it is we have filing cabinets full of papers and boxes full of papers and documents. And how long do we keep these? What do we do with them? Eventually, Provo City is going to get a new building. What are we going to do with all the papers that we have in this building? How did it go with the Energy Department with your new building?
Oh, it's crazy.
It's crazy, wasn't it? So the thing that we need to do right now is start a plan right now so that everybody understands what we can do with our papers, the retention schedules and everything. So the Utah Division of Archives and Records Services is Provo City's Bible for records management. This is where we go, besides Camille and legal, this is where we go to answer all our questions, to get all our questions answered. So what's on that one? Look at this, I'm so good. I just have to click my fingers. So there's 2 parts that we're going to be discussing today. First of all, in records management, there is the retention schedules. Now, I can't do this because my hand shakes. Right here, retention schedules. Who knows what retention schedules are? Good, I'm glad. Because every single paper that we generate has some type of a retention schedule. Some of them are a year, some of them are 3 years, some of them are permanent. So records schedules are very, very important. The other thing is training and certification. We need to get training and certified. And so today we're going to have Kendra with the state come down. She'll be down in about half an hour to an hour, and she'll be discussing records retention in detail. She works up at the state records office, and she and several of her cohorts are going through all of those records retention schedules. Have you seen those schedules? When I first started, there was a book like this thick, and you had to try and figure out where that record applied. They've been going through and trying to consolidate them and update those. So she's going to be here later on to talk about records retention. Then, go ahead to the next one. The other thing we're going to be talking about is grandma and open government. Grandma requests, as I said earlier, we have just been getting so many this year, and I kind of have a feeling that it's going to continue. We'll be getting a lot more grandma requests. So it's important for people in every single department to understand what you do with those grandma requests, how you respond, what our requirements are. So what we are asking the departments to do is have one person in each department/division that when we get a grandma request, we'll send it directly to them, and then they're going to be responsible for helping respond to that grandma request. Kari in Parks and Recreation. We've been getting some fun grandma requests, haven't we? And so I send my grandma request for Parks and Recreation to Kari. For the library, I would send them to Cindy. For community development, I copy Karen, but Emily gets, I don't know how you do it. Emily has so many grandma requests. It's amazing. So each department needs to have some responsible person that we can send the grandma requests to and then work within their department and division to respond to it. And so this is where another section we're going to talk about certified records officers. The state has a test that you can take. It's open book, and it's not timed. So it's a test that you can take that will help you understand grandma rules a lot better. What's protected? What's private? What isn't? What is? And so later on, we're going to be having Rosemary Cundiff. She's with the state. She's going to be going into more detail about grandma requests. She is amazing also. She is the ombudsman for the state. So that means if there's any problems, any difficulties, any conflicts, they go to her. And she has to help mediate them and resolve them. And then if they can't, then the State Records Committee will look at it. So those are just some of the things that we're going to touch on today, later on. Okay, so first portion I'm going to talk about is the Utah Public Notice webpage. This is part of our open government responsibilities. Many of you in here will not have anything to do with the Utah Public Notice webpage, but it's important to at least understand what it is and how it affects us. Provo City, besides, has several boards and commissions. We have the obvious ones, such as the council, the redevelopment agency, the planning commission. Those are our obvious big boards and commissions, but we have many of them: Parks and Recreation, Energy Board, Library Board, Airport Board, and all of these boards and commissions are required by state law to post their agendas on the Utah Public Notice webpage. So we're going to just kind of walk through that a little bit and talk about some of those things. So if you have any of these boards in your departments, you might want to make sure that we're getting everything posted correctly. Okay. So Utah Code Section 52.4 states that public notices or agendas on the public notice must be up no less than 24 hours before the meeting. So occasionally, Dan, who does the ice sheet, whatever it is, the ice sheet. Sometimes, he's usually really good. He'll get us the agendas a week in advance. But occasionally, it's been like if a meeting's at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday, at 2:59 on Tuesday, we better have that most current agenda posted. And occasionally, don't tell anyone, we've occasionally gone a few minutes over, but basically it has to be 24 hours in advance. Now, community development, they post all of their agendas by themselves. The planning commission, the design review committee, the administrative hearings, I can't even imagine, there's like 6 or 7 or 8 of them, TMAC. And so they are all responsible for making sure that they post. The public notice needs to include the agenda, the date, the time, and the place of the meeting. And then also another thing that we need to plan on is if you have an annual schedule, if you have a schedule for 2018, we should post that schedule on the public notice webpage, separate from agendas, so that so that the citizens can go out and see that. Yeah, poor Elizabeth, she has a bunch of them too with council meetings, redevelopment agency, and so you guys are all good. So there are several departments that post them themselves, but there are some departments that have us post them. Now, if you guys want to post them yourself to the UPN, that is great. We would love to have you do that. But if not, and you don't feel comfortable, what Amanda will need in the future is to make sure that that agenda gets to her at probably 48 hours so that she can get it posted in case there's technical problems with the state website. And it's happened in the past, believe me. So she needs it in advance. She needs the agenda in Word. Because, and I'll show you later, I'm just going to briefly walk you through how to post things, but you'll notice that it has to be in Word because we have to copy and paste, and copy and paste doesn't work very well with PDFs, and you can't just say, see attached agenda. You have to have the actual agenda posted and written out in there. And then if you have any items that you send with your agenda packet, you can send those in PDF and we can attach those, but it's just the agenda itself that needs to be in Word. So I'm going to have Amanda go really quick, and we're just going to walk through the public notice, how to do it. And I got to put my glasses on so I can see. By the way, I just think this is so cool. This is my going away open house. I planned it this way because I'm gone. So you guys are my favorite people in the whole department, in all the cities, because you do all the work for us. So thank you for attending my open house. This is great. Make sure you get food. Okay, so you can go to the public notice webpage, and all you have to do is Google Utah Public Notice, and it'll pop up this webpage. Now, everyone that posts on the webpage has to be given the rights to post, which you can get from Amanda and I, and actually Karen, and we found out quite a few people have owner rights. But you have to have the authority. So this is where, like for instance, Joe Citizen wants to come in and say, gee, what is Provo City doing? They can go to the government, click on cities, and then you can pull up the entity, maybe, and a list of all the cities, townships, organizations will pop up. And then, so you can go to Provo, there we go. And now over here on the right, that list that I showed you earlier of all the departments and all the boards and commissions? This is where you can go and you can access any of them. Let's go to the, we don't have, by the way, the Arts Council. Are we getting a new Arts Council board? Okay, so we need to make sure we get them. Okay, so let's go to the library board. So what you'll notice here is the citizens can say, oh, there was a meeting scheduled for November 8th. And if this is November 6th, then that's perfect. They can go to it. They can pull it up. They can see the agenda. They can look at all the information that's going to be discussed at that meeting, and they can decide whether or not they want to go. Now, Cindy, realistically, how many citizens actually come to your library board? Maybe 2 per year. And Parks and Recreation, how many? So it's important to get this information out. How many people for the airport board? Like citizens that are just off the street that want to come. Basically, it's there, it's available. People are more than willing to come, but they just don't. The main ones, the planning commission, the council meetings, the work meetings, some of those meetings, most people, you'll have people come, but some of these other boards and commissions, let's face it, not very many people actually come from the public. But we are still required to post them and make them available so that anyone can go and look at them. So that's what we can do right there. So now, for those of you who post the meetings, let me just walk you through how to post them. I'm going to do it really quickly. So you're going to log in. Try and figure out what her password is by the clicks. Password. Okay, so now on the left-hand side, under public notices, you'll see notices. You want to add a notice. So you'll go in here and you'll do the notice title. And I believe we have a sample one we're just going to play with just to show people how to do it. So she's going to type in the notice title. Energy Board meeting, Provo City Library Board meeting, Planning Commission, Redevelopment Agency. We'll just type in the notice title. Okay. No, yours is good. And then so it'll be Parks and Recreation. This is really, I'm sorry. It's not very user-friendly in that it's kind of, you have to go through a lot of different things to get what you need. So we're going to go to the Parks and Recreation Board. Up, 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 down, 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 down. And then what you'll do on the notice subject, you just you have to give a general idea of what subjects you'll be talking about. For Parks and Recreation, I always put Parks in subject 1, Recreation in subject 2. For Energy Board, Power, Budget. For Library, Libraries, Budget. So you don't have to, but it's, because it's pretty obvious, but that's what you have to do. So, and if you don't fill it out, then it'll send you an error message and say, start again. So now we're going to go and notice in a meeting. Occasionally there's a hearing, like, what's an example? Council and redevelopment. And Planning Commission have hearings that they'll click. But most of these will just be notice of a meeting. Then you just type in, you have to fill in the street address. It would be nice if some of this could fill in automatically. When you hit Parks and Recreation, boom, have everything fill in. But we're lucky sometimes to even get in. And so it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of time consuming, but it's just important that you have to fill in all these extra spaces. So what she's put in, she started the event start date and the time, and then the event end date and the time. And then occasionally on the event deadline, sometimes we'll post a public hearing for the budget. And so the deadline would come in here. You have by such and such a date and time to submit a comment for the budget. So that's what that would be used for. And now this is the description/agenda. This is the box where I'm talking about. In here you cannot put just see attached agenda. They don't let you do it. So what we have to do is copy and paste from the agendas that you send to us or that you prepare yourselves, like in community development and council. And did you hear that? If it's PDF, you can't copy and paste, so she has to type it all. That's why when you send us PDF. Yeah. There is a Word document. Kari will send both PDF and Word, and so will Cindy. So, and most of you do. By now, you know enough that I need a Word document. And the other thing is, if it's a Word document, don't put it in tables, please. Because we have to go in, once we copy and paste, if it's in a table, we have to go in and really manipulate that so that it actually shows up in that little box. So on this one, what we'll do, even with the Word documents that are just Word documents, we still have to go in and delete a few lines and make a few adjustments. But basically, that's all we do. We copy and paste, make a few adjustments. Then we go in. The ADA notification for each department or each board is automatically there. So if you notice that you need to change yours, if it has to have a new contact person, then let's get it changed. Electric participation, not really applicable for council, RDA, Planning Commission. There's electronic participation that people can phone in. And then other. This is where you can put, what do we put in some of the others? I'm trying to think. Oh. And then we would have some people come, wouldn't we? That's what we need to do. That's how we can get our public participation. Don't miss it. Do you want to give us a sample? This is true. Oh, yeah. I have my Princess Power outfit. There you go. Okay, so if it's an emergency notice, only if it's an emergency notice, it can be less than 24 hours, but you have to click the emergency notice to let the state know that this is a last-minute meeting. If we had to schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning at 10 to discuss something important, we would still notice it, but it would be an emergency notice. And those are the only ones that have to be less than 24 hours, that can be less. So email a copy of the notice. We always try and email a copy of the notice to whoever sent us, is it whoever or whomever? To the person that sent us the agenda, just so that they can verify that it has been posted. And if you do post, do you know what? I just thought about this. If you're posting them on your own, could you email a copy to Amanda? And then that way she will know that it's been posted also. And then at this point, you can do any attachments. So go ahead and browse. And do you know what? I probably have it. If you go, oh, it's on my desktop, sorry. So just find a document, because we aren't going to save this one. So this is where you can attach, like for instance, if your agenda is attached to some, like a budget or some other documents associated with it, we can attach that little agenda packet here, and then so you just attach it, and then you have to select the category. It won't let you continue unless you select the category. Yes, this is where you'd put the minutes, yeah. Or public information handout. If it's the minutes from the previous minute, we'd probably put it in public information handout because it's not the minutes for that meeting. Does that make sense? And then, so you can attach anything you want to and upload it. And then what you want to do before you actually click publish is hit preview notice. This just lets you go in and make sure that all of your changes that you made to the agenda and all of your things that you tweaked, that they show up in a readable fashion. So did you hit, is that the, that's the preview? Okay, here's our preview. And so if you scroll down, it shows you everything that you need. And then at that point, if it looks good, if everything is fine, then you can go ahead and hit publish. And now it's up on the public notice website, and you have fulfilled your requirement to publish that agenda. The other thing that you need to be aware of is occasionally meetings are canceled. Did we have an airport board that was canceled? We had already posted it, but it was canceled. So you can go in. Let's go into, so you go into the dashboard and search and find that meeting. And so I don't think we even got it posted. But if we decide to, you can go in and edit. And down at the bottom, cancel the notice. Now, when you cancel the notice, you need to be aware that it doesn't delete the notice. It just says canceled. So if someone were to go in and look at the public notice website and look for an airport meeting, they would go, oh, this meeting's canceled. So it doesn't delete it. So that's good to know. Anything else? Does anybody have any questions? I've been yakking up here all day. Okay.
So for December for our Parks and Rec board, we usually just take them to lunch somewhere.
Do I need to post an agenda for that?
You probably should, but the agenda would just be off-site meeting. Yeah, and you know, you can just say they're meeting at this location. Why not? That's when the citizens will show up, huh, and expect us to pay for them.
So you can sign up to get notices for any specific entity you want notices for. So for example, I signed up for municipal council. But the question I have then is, I get these notices, they update the documents or something. So can you explain how updating works? Do you know?
Sure, let me just explain. What she's saying is that any citizen can sign up to receive email notices when a notice is posted. So if I'm interested in library board, but I don't go to very many meetings, but I'm still interested, I can sign up for an email notification, and every time an agenda is posted for a library board meeting, boom, I'll get an email. Don't do it for all the cities. Now, what she's saying is that occasionally, like for instance, Elizabeth, who posts the council meetings, it seems like there's always a change. I think I've seen 3 and 4, sorry.
So there are occasionally changes to the agendas after we publish them, but after the meetings, for council meeting, we're required to post an audio recording. And so when I upload the audio recording, I also generally upload a summary of action, just summarizing what happened at the meeting. So anytime attachments are added and that notice is updated, even if it's not a substantive change to the agenda, you get a notification. But occasionally we do have agendas that change. So occasionally there's a flurry of those.
And that's a valid point. Like she said, every time anything is posted, updated, amended, changed on this public notice website, you will get an email notification if you sign up for those requests. So basically what you can do, let's say that at the last minute we decided to add a public hearing on rental contracts. So you would log in, and you just go into the search, and you would find the meeting where it was scheduled, and then you would just update the agenda. And what Elizabeth does is she puts a little notice or a disclaimer on the top that says, I don't know exactly how it goes, but amended number 2 or added number 3. So if there are any changes to the agendas, then we do need to make sure that those changes get posted also. Now, mainly it's just council and planning commission.
So Elizabeth, when you do that, you post the amended agenda, the whole thing, as opposed to just the part that you've amended, right? Thanks.
Good point. Yeah, she just reposts the entire agenda, but at the top it just shows this is what was added, this is what was changed from the previous one. So any more questions? I know you're all just wide awake. This is so exciting. Okay, now after the meeting is over. So we've had our meeting, everything went well, we've got the minutes from the previous meeting have been approved. So now this is where Amanda and I have had a lot of discussions. Utah code is kind of, how did Brian say, what did he say it was? Murky? What is required after the meeting is held? For the council meetings, it's required that we go back in to this public notice and we have to upload the audio recording of the meetings within 3 days after the meeting. We have to post the minutes that had been approved. We have to post them with just as soon as they've been approved. So we have to go back in here and update this information with the audio and with the minutes and with any any handouts that were given out during the meeting. A lot of times during a council meeting, you'll have citizens come and, give a presentation. Well, we have to post that presentation because it's something that was given at the meeting that wasn't included in the packet. So there's a lot of things with the council that we have to do. Now, this is where we the water is murky. In the past, we've started posting the minutes for each of the boards. So after the minutes are approved, we'll attach those minutes to the meeting for which they're for. Does that make sense? But according to Utah code, we don't have to do that. All we're required to do is post the agenda. But we are required to at least have the minutes and the audio available out on our public webpage or somewhere for the citizens to have access to if they're really interested in. So they don't have to go to the public notice, but they do have to go to a home page. I know in community development on their homepage, they have several different locations where you can go. You can go to the calendar, and if you look at the meeting for November 3rd and click on it, it'll have your agenda, it'll have your report of action, which is their minutes, and so you'll have access to all the information. And so this is where we're trying to decide if the divisions and departments decide they don't want to have to go back and post minutes on here, then we can go ahead, if you can put something on the agenda that gives a location of where those minutes can be found online, then that will suffice. But we need to make sure that they are available online somewhere for citizens to look at. And the public notice webpage is a great place, but a lot of times people don't go here. They go to the city's webpage. So if we have a place where those minutes are out there and available, and I don't know that that's been done in a lot of departments, is to make those minutes available, but that's something that we need to start doing and make sure that those minutes, and also we're required to record the board meetings. Everyone here is recording their meetings? that recording also needs to be available. So if you want to, on your agenda at the bottom, put some kind of a disclaimer that states audio recording or of this video of this meeting will be available at this location, and give it a link or a web page location. Minutes of approved meetings, approved minutes for meetings are available at this location. That way we can satisfy the requirement for making sure that the minutes and the recordings are available, but we don't necessarily have to go back there and post them. Now, council's different.
Right, I have a question. So we're not currently posting our recordings.
On your web page?
No, but I
Oh.
think the agenda says if you want one, you can request one from our department.
And actually, I think with like redevelopment agency, I think we went and we found where it shows on the web page that you can go to YouTube and find the recording, the video of the meeting. But it,
We don't do video for all of our,
no, for the planning commission you do,
yeah.
but some of the other meetings.
Other ones, we do record it, the audio, but I'm not posting them.
So that's what we'll need to start doing. We need to make sure that the audio is not only, I think it's important to make it available because they can request it and that would satisfy it. But if it's out there available on the web page, let's do it. Because then all we have to do when people are asking for it, just say, this is where you can go and find it. That way we don't have to stop and take the time to go and find it and copy it and send it. So, any questions? Oh, Kari.
How long do those need to be posted online?
Years worth, or is it forever?
Pardon? Actually, audio recordings, if I'm not mistaken, after the minutes have been approved, audio recordings, the retention is 3 years after the minutes have been approved. So you can keep those online for that long. I know with the council meetings, we are starting to, we're in the process of trying to summarize our meetings a little bit more so that our minutes aren't 25 and 26 pages long. And so we've been putting a link to the YouTube video, and then we can summarize the discussion, and then if citizens want to know more, they can click on that link and it takes them right there to the video portion of that meeting, and they can listen to the whole discussion. In that case, those videos and audio recordings are permanent because they're referenced in the minutes, and the minutes are permanent. So you have an option. You can do that if you want to. If you don't link the minutes, the video recording or audio in your minutes, then 3 years after the minutes have been approved. The minutes should be online forever. The minutes are permanent.
One issue you'll have is not relying on. You do not want to rely on YouTube for your record retention because YouTube has the ability to delete those videos at their discretion. So from a records retention perspective, you need to make sure you have an electronic copy other than YouTube. So generally, we just recommend from an IT perspective to do it out of convenience or another method. But if you have an audio recording of that you can upload, that would be preferable.
Okay, that's great. That's true. The audio, actually, do you know what? Records retention says this. Sometimes people in their departments will make a decision on their own and say, nope, I want to keep them forever. And in fact, Elizabeth has run up against, Elizabeth the other day came down and she took Amanda and I up to her office and showed us all these documents and all these tapes from council meetings from the 90s. And they're VHS tapes. And so it's like, how often can you even access those now? And so some people kind of keep it forever. And when Kendra comes and talks about retention, she's going to discuss this a little bit, but I'm going to tell you up front, if you have it, we have to produce it. So that's why it's important to follow the retention schedules. If there's a grandma requesting this, and we can prove that we destroyed it per the retention schedule, then we don't have to produce it. If we haven't destroyed it, and I have a recording from 1992, I've got to produce it. So that's one reason why the retention schedules are really important. So back to the public notice webpage. Does anybody have any questions about this? It is available out there if anybody wants to play with it. For those departments that have boards and commissions that want to post their agendas directly here, that's great. We can train you and we can do a little bit more training, but if you don't, go ahead and send them to Amanda, but just make sure you send them in Word. And we're happy to do that. Any questions? One other thing I don't think you guys are aware of, I wasn't aware of, well, until a little while ago. There's also, this is the public notice webpage. There's also a webpage for legal notices. So when we post a legal notice, all the newspapers have this agreement that anytime a legal notice is posted within their paper, they send it to the state, and so you can look up legal notices for any city or any that you want to. And so I actually played with it yesterday for a little while, and I was able to go back to Provo, and you can search by city, by county. Let's go to Provo. And then just do a cert, go. Don't put dates, yeah. Well, put go. Yeah, now go. And there you go. There's all our legal notices. Well, that's not all of them, obviously, but you just scroll down, and there are legal notices that everyone has submitted to the paper. So that's also good to know for documents, for if anybody questions whether or not we posted something, we have proof. Any questions? Thank you, you guys. Appreciate your time, and I'm going to turn some time over to Amanda.
Okay, so just really quickly while we're waiting for Kendra, who should be here any minute, I just wanted to go over the SIRE to on-base conversion because I know there's been a little bit of confusion about this. Just by, even Joey's confused and he does it all, so that should say something. So just by show of hands, who here uses SIRE today? Almost everyone, SIRE, right? Do you like SIRE? Okay, on-base is even better. How many use on-base? So like a third, if that. So very few people are familiar with on-base. So we just wanted to quickly go through kind of what on-base is, where it's going, and what will happen and how it will impact you. So Janine, if you'll go to the next slide. So we are in the middle of a big conversion right now. The conversion is to move the documents that we have in SIRE today into on-base. Some of the documents have already been converted. This kind of started out as a 2-phase thing. It's evolved into a 3- and 4-phase. Joseph would probably argue even more than that because he's converting legacy documents from the Haymore system. So what we've done so far is we have converted police, courts, redevelopment, finance, mayor's office. Those are all done. So those people like Jana Lee, Rebecca Gurr from police, they're already using on-base. The rest of you, though, will be converted at a later date. Just your documents. So our next phase will actually probably be phase 3, Elizabeth's group. So council, we are getting ready, hopefully soon, fingers crossed, to go live with our new council agenda and minutes product. At that point, we'll convert all of the council and recorder and some of the legal documents at that point. Legal's kind of its own story right now, so some of the legal documents. And then our phase 2 will actually take place when HCM or HR goes live sometime next year. So these are all kind of dependent on different modules of the Provo 360 project. So it's just really dependent on Kayenta, City View, things like that. So next slide. A lot of people have called me and said, what about my workflows? I don't know how to use on-base. How am I going to terminate an employee? Matt calls me about that every day. Just kidding. So those workflows are actually staying in Kayenta. They will not be converted to on-base. The only ones that are going to on-base will be your contract approval, and that will happen when HR goes live, hopefully. And then work session and council meeting, which is Elizabeth's project, and Karen S. We're trying to integrate her community development City View product into the council agenda so that when they schedule something, it just kind of automatically goes onto the council agenda. And then we also have our ordinance and resolution workflow. So most of you will not be using on-base for workflows that we know of, right, Josh?
Probably should mention the upgrade.
Why the upgrade?
So what a lot of people don't understand is what happened with Sire. So Sire is a product that was actually acquired by a company called Highland, which their main product is called OnBase. So OnBase is taking over the Sire. So it's kind of like the next upgrade. So we're going to version 1.0 to 2.0 of Sire. This is equivalent. We're going from Sire to OnBase as the upgrade path. So this isn't in theory supposedly a totally different product, but Sire as a standalone product does not have a future right now. So what we're doing is we're going to the on-base upgrade product so that all of the new software integrates with it rather than have to rewrite a bunch of stuff. So that's why you're seeing some of these happen. So just a little bit of the why behind the what. It's not a totally different product, even though it kind of is. But it is the upgrade path from Sire to the next version of what Sire would become.
So just to give you an idea of what's coming next, for me, I'm constantly working on this. It doesn't really impact a lot of you. Customer service just went live with their permits, licensing, rental housing. And what most of their CSRs probably don't even realize is that they're using OnBase without even ever seeing it, thanks to Joseph. So anytime his staff, Matt's staff, is attaching a document like a rental housing application, it's actually storing it in OnBase, but they're viewing it through CityView without even really realizing where it's coming from. So there's some advantages to doing this. For me, I think the biggest is security. We have duplication, we have backup, so we're never losing those documents. And then, so, like I said, we just went live with that. We have finance and HR with Kayenta that will be going live later in 2018. We're working on that integration now. Community Development Council agenda, like I mentioned before, we're trying to get that so that it just flows seamlessly into Elizabeth's process and they're not constantly having to send over items from Planning Commission. I had no idea how much work was involved in that. There's a lot. So hopefully we can make that a little bit easier. We'll also have HR training modules that will hopefully be integrated with OnBase. I say hopefully because we're just barely starting it. We can do it though. So why OnBase? How many of you store documents on your desktop today? Can your coworkers get to those? If you were to be out sick tomorrow, could they access them? How many of you have piles of documents like that on your desk? Or how many of your bosses have piles of documents like that on your desk? Even better. Oh, I saw that. So if you are storing documents on paper, if you have them on your desktop, consider using OnBase. It's really easy. You can sweep stuff in from a directory. We can scan it. If you have papers, we can scan it. We can index it. We can use keyword values so that you can find it. This is more work for me, but I'm happy to do it. I want you guys to be organized. I want you to feel like you have the option to use this if you're not using it already. It was amazing when I saw the papers up in Elizabeth's office, and I'm like, oh my goodness, why haven't we been scanning this all along? We can apply retention schedules. It can delete itself automatically. It can have a backup so we never lose it. But a lot of us aren't doing that. So if you're interested, let me know. I can come down, look at your situation, see if this might be something that you're interested in. You can store anything. You can store audio, video. The police department, we don't have anyone from police, do we? Police department's storing their body cam video in there. They're storing recordings, interviews, things like that. We can control all of the security so only the people you want to access can access it. It's just really a great product. So if you're interested, we can set up some time for training, or if you'll go to the next slide. There's some stuff out on the home.provo.org. Josh has done a great job of putting some Kayenta and CityView documentation out there. There's just a little bit on OnBase. Go out there, look at the videos. It's from our training that we had back in June. There's some PDFs, or call me. I'm happy to come down and spend some time with you. So any questions about OnBase before we turn the time over?
Well, one of my main questions, and I don't know if this is going to be touched somewhere else, is there a plan to have sort of a centralized grandma repository?
As far as someone requesting a grandma request, or?
Yeah, like, well, their request and what they were given.
And the response. So this is a good point, and we kind of overlooked this. There is currently a open records portal, which I'm sure Kendra and Rosemary may talk about. There's an open records portal that the state has that's kind of centralized. Not many people use it, though. So I do hope to do something like this. It's something I've talked to Josh about, and hopefully on the eGov portal. We plan to set this up, but it's still just very,
It is in scope for it,
very early, so.
Sometime in the next 2 years.
So, next question for Josh, maybe. Right now we're doing that case file. So what do we do between going live on CityView and
Great question.
Thank you.
Don't have to. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're storing the actual response to the grandma in case file?
Yeah, I mean, we store the request and the person's name so we can search it, so it's searchable, but we store the actual documents that we gave them.
So Joseph, is that something we'll convert?
Requests in the past, but I want a grammar request to see what you gave somebody else.
You know, though, Emily is really great about when she responds, she copies Janine and I, and we do save those. So we have the actual application and the response. I think the only department that doesn't copy us really is police, just because they're so independent. But otherwise, we are managing that. So if you do, yes, I'm happy to. I can store them where we put them, and
Just to us and say, can I have a copy of this building permit?
Yeah, I was just going to say, because police department gets a lot of them directly to them. They get some through us. Community development, you get some through us and some directly. And then fire department also gets a lot that go directly to them. Police department, I'm not worried about that much because they get so many, they can, and Rebecca is actually a certified records officer, so she can maintain those records. But everyone else, if you get a grandma request through you, that's fine. Go ahead and respond, but just copy us on the response. And any other departments, if you get a grandma request that comes directly to you, just fine. Just make sure you copy us on the response. A lot of times it's not very user-friendly to say, oh, you've got to call this person to get this grandma request, and then they call us, and then that goes back to you guys. So to make it easier for the citizens, just copy us.
Okay.
Amanda.
us. You're not gone yet. Another good point, just to follow up on that, is even Janine, with her many, many years of grammar request experience, she still copies Camille just because there's some things that we're not quite sure. She'll run it by Camille first and say, should we release this? So if you're ever in doubt, just ask. And I hope Camille doesn't mind me saying that, but we need to be sure that we're not releasing something that we shouldn't be. So, anything else before we turn it over to Kendra? So we have Kendra Yates, she's from Utah State Archives, and Rosemary Pundit, yes, thank you. And they're just gonna spend some time with us today and hopefully answer all of our lingering questions, so we'll go ahead and turn it over. We'll have you speak into this.
Hello, hello.
Either one.
Hello. Hi, I'm Kendra. It's always nice to hide behind a podium, right? But I'll probably be out here. And actually, I'll need a clicker too. So. Okay. Okay. So I am a records analyst at the State Archives, meaning, I'm the manager of the records analyst section, but records analysts, we're just basically your contact at we work with records officers from your agency, Janine and Amanda mostly, but there are a few others as well, and I'll show you those, to answer their questions about records. So that can be a wide range of questions. Rosemary specializes in GRAMA. She's a state records ombudsman, so government records ombudsman. So GRAMA questions go to her, but everything else comes to the analysts. Okay, so I'm just going to teach a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about records management, keeping in mind that you guys are not records officers necessarily, but you're the ones you're the boots on the ground, dealing with creating and managing records right in front of you. So what I'd like you to be able to do after this training is know what a record is, what a record isn't, be able to identify records that you create and maintain, and understand the record's life cycle so that you understand why we have retention schedules, and be able to find retention schedules and keep those up to date or keep up with the updates, because we're updating those, and know who to contact with questions, and know the difference between the State Archives and the State Records Center, and be able to prepare boxes for transfer. These are some points that Amanda specifically wanted me to talk about, so go ahead. These are the laws. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them, but I wanted you to know what they are. In case you have questions, you can follow up on those. Yes.
Her presentation on
that we'll send to you electronically. So that all these slides will be available to you electronically. Sorry.
Post them on the internet too.
Yes, we do have these electronically. And actually, I've got handouts, but yeah, so these are the main laws. They define different records terms. They talk about the different duties of governmental entities and the state archives and the state archivist and the state records committee. So, should I dance? So that's what the laws are. You can go ahead and flip past that. Yes. So, yes, can you hand these out? I didn't even staple them, so they're whatchamacallited, but they're not. Yeah. Thank you. So we don't use staples at the archives. It's this funny thing. We had a new employee a few months ago. She's like, "Why am I the only person in the building that staples things together?" We just don't. It's hours of pulling them out, I guess. Anyway, so a record. The law defines what a record is. You know, there are a lot of different definitions depending on which state you're in and the field of records management. But in Utah, GRAMA has defined record as any item that is prepared, owned, received, or retained by a governmental entity in the course of business, right? And that means, point one there, it doesn't matter what media it's stored on, okay? So it could be paper, it can be electronic. I think you guys probably already all know this, but it has to be reproducible. So an artifact actually is not a record because you can't reproduce it, right? Uncle Billy's wagon from pioneer days can't be a record. A conversation that's recorded is a record because you can reproduce it. Conversation that's not recorded is not a record, right? So the law also goes into some detail about what's not a record. So personal emails and documents that are not work-related are not records. Doesn't matter what device it's on. It's not a record. However, discovery, that doesn't mean it's not susceptible to discovery. Yeah.
Doesn't matter what account it's on. So let's say I, for whatever reason, utilize my work email address in personal communications. Is that a record?
So this gets really messy. If it has anything to do with government business, it doesn't matter what device it's on, it's a record, a government record. We're talking about government records here, right? So it doesn't matter what account it's on, what device it's on. If you're talking about government, it's a government record. If you're not talking about government, it's not a government record, okay? But when in discovery, right, they can, if you've done any business at all on a personal account, your whole personal account is susceptible, is vulnerable. You have to hand it all over. So,
but personal communications done through my city email are not admissible.
In court, they are. But it depends. I'm not going to get into that. But they're not government records, but if the court asks for something, you give them something. So it's a lot safer. And what we recommend is that if you receive something personal on your work, forward it to your personal and delete it from your work. And vice versa. If you receive something on your personal that's work-related, forward it to your work, delete it from your personal. That's what we recommend. Just be safe. Yeah. Because I know you can't always control what email people are sending you things on. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's so same with texts and instant messaging. Yeah. Yeah.
So discovery and grandma are different.
They are different.
So
yes.
Can someone request a grandma request for your text messages on your personal phone?
If it's about government business, yes. It's a government record. That's what's
Well, because you said that
grammable.
a court can do this.
Yeah, it's different what a court can do. It's true. For discovery, right, Rosemary? I shouldn't get into this, but
Okay.
As far as grandma is concerned, it's not government.
right. Off limits, yeah, if you're not talking about government. But if you are, doesn't matter where you are. What was the beginning of it? So like a discussion about the employee association? Yeah, I'm wondering, is that a private? Yeah.
I don't think it's a government. I mean, the Employees Association is a voluntary organization that's with the Provo City employees, but it's not a specific Provo City function. So my understanding is it's not, like, we had a recent grandma request for some information, and we were told the Employees Association information did not need to be included because they're separate. When you, yeah, so.
I'm going to let Rosemary answer that question later. Can you make note of that and answer that question later? Because I'm not going to get into grandma stuff. Sorry. So what the law says is that personal emails and documents that are not work related are not government records. Temporary drafts created for personal use. A couple components there, and maybe Rosemary will go into this too. But if it's a temporary draft, it's not a record. So that means that there was a final created, right? If it was the last one that was created and you're using it, then that's not a temporary draft anymore, right? And then if it's created for personal use versus being circulated at a meeting, a committee meeting, and discussed and decisions made based on it, that's not personal use. So then it would be. Books contained in a library, so copyrighted materials, and that gets a little, there's some specifics to that, but in general, copyrighted materials. Junk mail, spam, not a record, and computer programs, not databases, but computer programs, the actual coding is not a government record. So, turn. I should have brought, maybe I even did bring my own. So, we're actually going to do an activity soon where you have to decide if they're records or not. So the first step really of cleaning up or organizing is going to be separating records from non-records. That's the easiest thing you can do to reduce the stuff that you're looking at. I don't think I do. So reference materials are not, if they're not created by your agency, those are not actually government records. They're not your government records, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but if you build up a reference library of, I don't know, pamphlets from workforce services or something, those are workforce services records. They're not your records. Shared records maintained only by the other governmental entity. Like if you've established that they are sharing this with you for a temporary use, oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't know what to do without this, you could tell, huh? So that's just something you need to agree on. If you're sharing a record, there's actually a whole procedure, and maybe Rosemary will go into that too. There's a whole procedure for sharing a record where you have to sign a form saying that you agree to not disclose it, blah, 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 except according to whatever their classification, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so shared records, we're assuming that you've discussed with whoever you've shared with, who's got the record copy, and what your purpose is, and usually those you just are going to destroy as soon as you're done using the shared record. So you're not taking on that responsibility. Let's see. We'll move right on. We already talked about that. Okay, so in front of you is a packet. The first, I don't know, 6 pages or so, 7, 8 pages or so. The first page is kind of just a little guideline for sorting through records. And then the next ones are samples of records, and I would like you, and you can work with a partner if you want, but I'd like you to go through these and decide if it's a record or if it's not a record. And then we'll talk about it together. So the last one you'll be doing is the one that says this is a draft. guys are done. How are you guys doing? You need another minute? Until it says this is not a draft. In red. Oh, it says this is a draft. I'm sorry. Boy, good direction following. You would pass that ACT question. Yeah, it says this is a draft in red. Sorry. That's the last one you're going to do. Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and look them over together. So what did you guys think of the first one? Questions about email retention and email. Yes, it's a record? That's right. Why is it a record? Work-related, government business. Okay. What about the second one? This I am, sorry, there we go, between Katie and Ariel. Yes, because of the last part. It starts off fluffy, right? Starts off talking about cookie dough, and then it gets into policy discussion. So it becomes a government record. This is a draft? The IM? Yes. Even though you're saying this is not on record, yes. Yes. That's a funny thing that Google does, but it's not true. They're not the ones defining what's a government record, so they can say this isn't being saved, but it doesn't really matter. It's being saved somewhere, and it is a government record, so yes. Yeah. Government business, right? All right, Cowabunga Dude. What'd you think of this one? Yeah, this is an HR record, right? Definitely government business. Okay, what about the one on the back from Orbitz? No, why is it not a record? Right. Yeah, it could be junk mail, or it could be someone providing some information about flights, but it's not, as far as we can tell, it's not. As far as we can tell, this is not a record. There is a context under which it would be, I guess. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If I had said, Rosemary, what flights can we take for this trip to whatever for a work-related something? So it's possible, but let's just assume it's junk mail, that it's an advertisement from Orbitz. I think that's what it originally was, and it was forwarded. Okay, what about this one? We're on subject representatives. Harper Bill, what are we on? Did I skip one? Yeah, so Representative Harper's bill. Sorry, what did you guys say about this? I heard a no because it's a draft and a yes because. Okay, so this one's a little tricky. So yes, it's a draft, but it's a draft of legislation, which is different. Sorry, that's tricky. Drafts of legislation are actually permanent records because we want to know how the laws were created, and so that process is documented. And we're assuming that the people in this conversation are responsible for actually drafting the bill. Right. Right. Yeah, it's just different with legislation. I know, sorry to throw such a kink in there, but. If it's a few people working on a policy, and they're emailing back and forth and reading it, and that's their means of discussing it, that's the process of creating the policy. So that process is protected. If you end up with a final draft, then this is not a record. Right. If you don't ever end up with a final draft, then you kind of have a record on your hand. Drafts are really messy, and Rosemary Cundiff wrote a really fantastic article that she's posted on our website about drafts that goes into more detail. Yes?
Many times we would get requests wanting to know what the intent was. And so this talks about, obviously we don't want the bill to impede the accounting and doing its job. So if it refers to the thinking behind the bill or the legislation, then that is sometimes important.
Yeah, so these are permanent records. Yeah, thank you. That's good insight. So people do specifically ask that about legislation. What was the intent? Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Link's not working. This is an email. This is a government record, you say? Okay. It's a government record because... Okay. Talking about government business. Stuff on the website. Okay. How about the dude? Why is this not a record? Okay, I heard a few different answers. Yes, it's copyrighted material by somebody else. If this was a publication from your agency, it would be not just a record, but a permanent record, just so you know, your publications, even like staff newsletters are permanent. So, but this, yes, is just some other person's magazine, so not a government record, even if it's discussing things relevant to your government job. Okay, the last thing is actually one document on 2 pages, sorry. The codes for contact is a draft of a policy. So, man, we've talked about drafts too much. Sorry. So record or not record? We need to know a little bit more, don't we? I can see that look on your face. It was not distributed for anything but to figure out the policy. And there is a final, and it's totally different. So this is, yeah, not a record. Okay, good job. Good job. I tested you pretty early on before we'd really gotten into it. But the other thing you need to think about with these is not just whether it's a record, right? If it's a record, do we keep them all? Do we give them all to the state archives to preserve historically? Everything is a government record? Please, no. All right, you're out of here. No, we don't give it all to the state archives for the historical record, do we? Some of it we do, and some of it we don't. So what's that process? How do you know how long to keep something? And how do you decide? I mean, you guys just did it. You went through and thought about, is it a record or not? But you also were thinking about whether it was a valuable record. She mentioned this has a value. People ask for this, even for historical bills. So that's when we're thinking about the value of the record. That's called appraisal, like you would a house, right? You look at the value of a house, you appraise the value of a record. So that's the next step in determining how long to keep something. And that's what we do when we create retention schedules, is we think about what is the value of this record. Okay. So if you organize your records in your office, you can free up over half of your office and computer space. Just getting rid of stuff that you actually should and can get rid of. So a few things to think about when you're analyzing and assessing your records. There we go. Social media, we didn't get into very much. We talked a little bit about IMs and whatnot. But social media, if it's about government business, is a record, even if it's on someone's private social media account. That's tricky because you don't have a way to really harvest somebody's private social media. Even harvesting your own is really hard, right? Something to think about. It depends on what it is on the social media site. You might have that copy of, say you published a policy on your social media website. Well, you have the policy elsewhere, and maybe that's the copy that you designate as a record copy. But if people start talking about the policy on your social media, that's a different record. That's a conversation about policy, right? So something to think about. Personal documents, we already kind of talked about that. Temporary drafts, we talked about. Database systems, I would just mention again, the database itself is not a record, but it's full of records, right? It's like a cupboard full of records. People sometimes use database to mean the information itself, but really the database is the cupboard, the structure that holds the tables of data or unstructured data. So that's the tricky thing. What's in your database? Records. What do they look like? What records are actually in your database? When we made things on paper, we had paper in front of us that was a record, so it was really easy to identify what our records were because they were manifest empirically, right? On a database, how do you know what's in there and what the records are and what they look like? It's tricky. So one thing we like to talk about to kind of help us think about figuring out what records we have in that big, mysterious database. At least ours is such a mystery. Governmental entities exist in order to carry out the public's business. And that's why you're created, right? Somebody said, we need to have somebody in charge here in this crazy town of Provo. And so they made a city government, right? That's what you're here for. So what government functions do you guys fulfill? What do you do? What is your government business that you do? I heard an answer over here. No? Okay. Supply power? Yes. Utilities? Okay. People are grateful for that, and then when it's gone, that's when they're especially grateful to you. Someone said police. What do police do? That's very true. Actually, my husband is one, and that's the part that he hates of his job, but he has to do it. Lots of records. So true. What do the police do, though? Think about the function of a police. Why were they installated? Protection. Keep the peace. Service to the citizens. Yeah. They pull over and change someone's tire, even if they're not highway patrol. And even if they're in an unmarked car and nobody would know, that's my husband. He's like, pulled over and changed the tire. Yeah, okay, so there's protection and keeping the peace and serving in a variety of ways, however that looks. Actually, Murray City, this is so by the by, but I just loved it because I love libraries and reading, but there's this teacher at a school in Murray, an elementary school in Murray, that started doing a mystery reader every week. And the parents were in charge of arranging for the mystery reader, so the kids didn't even know who was coming in. There was one boy that loved police officers, so his mom asked the chief of Murray City Police to come in and read, and he did. He came in, and he's a grandpa. So he's a cute man. He's been a chief, or been with Murray City Police for 33 years. So he came in and read a book to these kids, and the kids said, we got to ask him some questions afterwards, and one of them said, how many people have you shot? Yeah, and he said none. You know, in 35 years of police work, and I haven't shot any, but the kids are hearing social media, the media talk about it so much that they think it's normal, so it's good. Anyway, so that's just an example of the service that you guys do, helping the community understand who you are and what you really do, which is not shooting the people. So, in general, sorry, I shouldn't get into that, but yeah, so you have lots of functions. So utilities and police, what other kinds of functions do you have? I mean, there's a
Programs and classes.
Programs and classes for what?
We do the work in Parks and Rec. So
Okay. Okay, so Parks and Rec is an interesting one. That's actually created, at least on the state level, they created it to, oh, help me out. We just celebrated their 60th anniversary this year, but the original documentation was something like to help the citizens enjoy a wholesome enjoyment of life. That's what it was, and we thought that was so funny. But yeah, I mean, the idea is really to enhance people's. So there's keeping people safe, which is kind of very necessary to life, and then there's helping them have a better life, quality of life. Yeah, it's really interesting. What else do you guys do?
Our staff who support the council members who are the elected officials that are the legislative body, so kind of the laws that govern how the police department enforces and keeps public safety.
Right. So the government actually makes laws, rules that they expect people to live by, and then the law enforcement enforces the laws. So you work there helping them with that business of making law and deciding how to interpret law, those kinds of things. Great. There's people that come and stand in line out there for help at the desk. What are they here for? For what? Service for what? They're here for help? Yeah, no, they're here to complain. Part of it is paying for utilities. Okay. Parking tickets? Ah. So all those are all different functions. Have you really thought about that? I mean, how many things you do for the citizens? It's a lot, right? Yeah. Okay. So the reason we talk about that is because each of those things then has a process in order to do it. And from the customer service side all the way to the billing side, there's all of these, to the actually out there at the poles, making sure that the electricity is getting where it needs to be, right? So there's all these different components to it, but you have different processes for all of those components, and each of those processes results in records. So that's why we're going through that. That's kind of how to think about what's actually in my database. Well, what am I doing that I'm using it for? I'm documenting payments from citizens or contractors, and payments to whoever contracted help. So there are really a couple categories of function. I have to point it that way. There's the common ones, common administrative functions that almost everybody has, right? Human resources, budgeting, creating policy, accounts payable and receivable, those kinds of things. Very common. And then there are unique business functions that you are made to do, okay? It can be something like mosquito abatement, safety inspection, Medicaid eligibility screening, overseeing horse races in Utah. That's a thing. Did you know that that's a thing? Yeah, it's under the Department of Agriculture and Food, a horse racing commission. I had no idea. The things you learn, it's really awesome. Facilitating economic development in the state. That's under GOED, or Governor's Office of Economic Development. And they have different programs. One example is they're trying to get people to come to Utah to have their businesses here or to produce films here. So they have these different incentive programs. One of them is the Motion Picture Incentive Program. So I actually had someone call me with a question about a very specific paper record in front of her. How long should I keep this? And it turned into this. It turned into almost a month of conversations, and it was like unraveling a sweater, you know? You pull the one thing, and all of a sudden, it led in, but I had to follow that record to figure out what's the context. What are you trying to do? Why do you have this record? Turned out they have a whole huge database, and what she was talking about was the crew and location lists. I don't know if you can read this, but on the left there. But that was part of this huge process of the production companies applying and them handling that application and discussing it in a board meeting and approving or denying it and developing a contract with terms, you know. It's like a grant almost. So, and then figuring out whether or not they complied with the contract and can have the money. So that whole big long process started with just one paper record, but that's what was going on behind the scenes. So knowing that can help you understand what records you're creating, and we put those into groups called record series. It's a group of records, and they're related in some way. Maybe they have the same function, they're part of the same process, same description, maybe they need to be managed together for some reason, and they have the same disposition. They can't have different dispositions. That's key. So then we take those groups of records and we create record series, retention schedules, record retention schedules. So the law calls scheduling, specifying the length of time that each record series should be retained by a governmental entity for administrative, legal, fiscal, or historical purposes, and when each record series should be transferred to the state archives or destroyed. So within that are the appraisal values that we give to records, administrative, which every record has, because you wouldn't create it unless it actually did something for you, right? So every record has administrative, but some of them have legal, not a lot, but some. Some have fiscal, if you're paying bills or budgeting or whatever, keeping track of money spent. And then some have historical purposes, probably about 20%. So those are the appraisal values that we attribute, which we did as we went through the sample records. This, I think you guys all know this, but electronic records are records too. I have to say it because you would not believe how many times we hear, and this was from a court records officer, I probably shouldn't tell you this, I won't tell you who, but she said, oh, we don't have any records anymore, we do it all electronically. What are you, okay, it's a good thing we're on the phone and I can't see your face. No, it's probably good she didn't see my face, but anyway. So I just feel like I have to say it, all right? Electronic records are records too. And actually the legislature has said that you have to establish, every governmental agency shall, that means you have to, establish record retention schedules for any electronic records created or received. So they have to have retention schedules too. All right, so when figuring out how long you need to keep something, I think it can be helpful to understand that records actually have a life cycle that's been mapped out. There's the first phase, which is creation or receipt of the record. Usually that's quick, right? Here's the record we just created, somebody signed, record's done, right? But sometimes that can be really, really long. I don't know if you guys have very many of these kinds of things, but case files for like attorneys, patients, those kinds of things, those develop over years and years and years because you're dealing with that patient for years, right? So the creation phase can be really long for some records. For legal cases, sometimes go decades and decades, and especially if they have to do with land or other resources. So those records are being created for decades and decades. The whole time the case is going, that case file is being developed. Does that make sense? But for most records, creation just happens in a short amount of time. And then there's maintenance and use, which is when you're using it in the office, or maybe it's stored off-site, but you still have to keep it around for an audit, something like that. So that can be inactive records or active records. If you're looking at them like less than once a month, those are considered inactive. And then there's those that you're using constantly, right? The active. But all of those are still in that phase of maintenance and use. And then the last phase is final disposition or disposition. And that's when the retention ends and you have to either destroy it or transfer it to the state archives or preserve it permanently. So retention schedules, the purpose of a retention schedule is to tell you when the records need to move through each of those phases. Okay? That's what it tells you. And whether or not to destroy or preserve. The retention period of a retention schedule is covering that middle section, the maintenance and use. And it's based on how often you're using it, what you need it for. So appraised value, is this still have an administrative value or a fiscal? And then any laws. Every once in a while there's a law that says how long something needs to be kept. Not very often. It makes our job easy when there is, but we'll get to that later. Disposition is destroy or never destroy, keep permanently, which usually is transfer to the state archives or may transfer to the state archives. So, what has historical value? Sometimes I get this question, especially from smaller entities or cities. But here's what has historical value. Things that describe your agency's history have historical value. That can be scrapbooks and photos, but it can also be the development of the meeting minutes, the development of law, which is covered in meeting minutes. But it can also be building plans for significant buildings in your community. I mean, there's a lot of different things that can contribute to building that history of an agency. And then things with research interest. So you never know what that's going to be, but places, people, historians, we're a crazy lot, right? So you never know what's going to catch someone's fancy, but thinking about that, is there somebody that would go back 100 years later and find this interesting and be able to use it for research? Things with intrinsic value, because they're really old. The content is unique and valuable just inherently. So if you transfer records to the state archives, it's different than the State Record Center, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, so maybe I should just skip it. But State Archives is downtown in Salt Lake City, and if we own a record, if you've transferred a record there and we have it in our holdings, we have full custody, full responsibility, which means if someone wants a record from there, they have to contact us to get it, right? So if someone comes and asks for a record from you, but you've transferred it to us, you have to refer them to us, the research center. If you want it, you also have to contact us via the research center, email or phone or whatever. But if you're storing it up at the records center, though, in Clearfield, those are still your records. You haven't transferred custody to us. You're just storing them off-site at a building that we provide at no cost to you storage, right? We'll get into that a little bit more. Records are property of the state, the law says. So don't intentionally destroy, mutilate, damage, dispose of them contrary to a properly adopted retention schedule. And this applies specifically to the record copy. So because we create records in so many formats and so many copies of the same record, because it's easy, right? It makes it convenient to collaborate about a policy or whatever. Then you end up with a lot of copies of the same record. So how do you know which one is the one that has to follow the retention schedule? Well, that's the record copy. That's the one that has to follow the retention schedule by law. That's what that means. So that can be kind of tricky, because what it means is that your agency has to choose which one is the record copy, and then commit to keeping it for the full retention length, which means if you're transferring it to the state archives or trying to keep it permanently yourself, you have to keep it in a format that is still usable, that whole retention period, right? And you have to manage all of the copies of it and figure out how many there are and make sure that all of them are destroyed when the record copy is destroyed, because if you destroy the record copy but keep another copy, right, it becomes the record copy by default. So that's tricky. I know that's tricky. So what are the two primary types of retention schedules? There are general retention schedules. So these are the ones that cover the functions that are common that we talked about, like HR and accounting and those kinds of things that almost everybody does. So we can make general retention schedules for those things that everybody can use, saves everybody a lot of work and a lot of time. But then for those unique processes, not everybody does horse racing, right? Really just one commission does horse racing. So we don't need to make a general schedule for horse racing documents, right? So there's a series-specific retention schedule. It's a retention schedule that's specific to one record series. So we call it a series-specific retention schedule. And those cover unique functions. And they're owned by a specific agency, those retention schedules. So I just wanted to show you how to find retention schedules. This was one thing Amanda wanted me to cover with you. So they're on our website under Records Management, under Record Retention Schedules, and on the left there are the general retention schedules. And on the right, you can look up your agency or a specific retention, series-specific retention schedule by number. So you can find any kind of them here. This is where you find all of them. And I recommend that you look for series-specific retention schedules first, because if you can find those, they have already been made for your records, with Provo City in mind. And you can see that there are some. This isn't all of your agencies, but you can see the police department has about a dozen. Public Works has just one for improvement district drawings and plot plans. and the community development department has about 10 there. So looking for these first, using these first is best, and if you can't find those, then find a general retention schedule. Now, we've been updating retention schedules for a few years now, and sometimes that makes it so that people can't find them, and they'll call in and say, I know there was a retention schedule for purchase RFPs, sorry, whatever that stands for, referral for purposes. Proposal, thank you. So someone called me the other day, I can't find it, I know it was here. So this is why they couldn't find it, but I'm gonna show you how to find it. So to find those ones that may have been updated, you click on that view both active and obsolete schedules together, and then the gray ones are the obsolete schedules. Those will pop up. Oh, that's what I knew it was there, right? So then you go and you click on the gray. Those are links. They're gray, but they're links. So you click on that, and it will take you to the title, not the description or the retention, just the title, and it will say, please refer to the state schedule for requests for proposal bids. And that's a link, and you click on that link, and it takes you to the actual schedule. So that's the schedule for everybody in the state. What we're trying to do is kind of streamline it. There was no point in having 3 retention schedules, one under city, one under county, one under state, if it's all the same. Same need, same retention, so we're creating one schedule instead of 3. And just to give you a little heads up, we are actually updating our interface as well and going to a search bar with filters. One of the filters will be municipal, but just so you know, you're losing your categories. The idea was to make it easier, and I know it's not going to feel that way at first, but the idea is to make it easier. You can just go in there and say, request for proposal. You don't have to go through clicking on all these different categories. And then if you put something in there like grants, you might get enough hits that you want to use filters to no, I just want the one for block grants. Anyway, so that's coming in the next few months, actually. So that's how to find general schedules. What did I just do? Just so you know, once a schedule has been approved, it's considered active and supersedes all previous versions of that schedule. Some people really want to hold on to those old schedules, but once there's a new one, that's the one that legally needs to be followed. So it doesn't matter when the records were created that you're dealing with, they follow the new schedule. Okay. Sometimes get that question. So really quickly, just understanding general retention schedules. It takes practice to find them, to learn how to find them. Rebecca Shaw at the State Archives is the one that's updating those and creating those, and she is a fantastic resource. If you can't figure out how to find or use a general schedule, I confess that sometimes I am Rebecca. There you go, I'm creating a government record. Rebecca, she always knows. She always knows. She's amazing. But it takes practice, and so does understanding how to use them, because it's not enough just to read the title. You really need to read the description. That's the key. Okay, that's if I were going to give you any tips, read the descriptions, because that's where you'll actually find out if your record will fit in this category. And we're trying to make bigger buckets, so sometimes people want them to be very specific. They're not going to be very specific. You need to think broadly. What's a broad categorization for this record I'm holding? And then you'll probably have an easier time finding what you need. So I've got a couple here that I just thought it might be helpful to look at. The open meeting minutes and public materials, and the open meeting recordings. So what's the difference? Well, look at those retentions and disposition. So one is permanent, and one is destroy. So why so different? Well, you have to read it carefully. It's only destroy if you have official written minutes that have been approved, and you've kept it for 3 years, and then destroy, right? If you don't ever write down the minutes and get them approved, then the audio recording is permanent, okay? So you just have to make sure you read all of it. Read all of the words. They're not even fine print. Just read all the words, and that will help you know what you're looking at there. So that would be my other tip on that. Hello. And I don't know if you guys want me to spend some time actually looking through them with you, or we want to sample. You guys want me to actually look through your general schedules with you, or just we'll get to questions? Yes.
Question about timing. So is it best practice just before you do it? Is it just best practice before you look at doing a destruction or some kind of a change in your record to check the then current version of the retention schedule, or is this a once per year and there's a time fencing that says you only have a year to go into? Okay.
Okay. I like your question. He's wondering, like, timing wise, before I destroy, should I always check to make sure there hasn't been an update? So Rebecca Shaw publishes every year all of the updates that were made for the year. She creates a publication that tells you all of that. So annually going through is, I would say, a must, that you need to keep track of those updates annually. She also blogs. I mean, I don't know. We have a blog. She sends out emails. If you know something's been changed, you should be complying with the new one. And it's not that hard to look to see if it's still there, but I understand that part of the strategy is having a routine, so maybe just adding that to the routine is a good idea. But yeah, at least annually that needs to be.
Closed loop. Something's changing. How we get the notice? Is that yearly publication that's the.
There's the yearly publication, but there's also on the blog. So, and I didn't go into this, but if she's updating a retention schedule, okay.
Proactive, you said emails. Is there like a list that you can apply your email address to that
Yes.
alert you to the fact that changes?
Absolutely. Yes. Rebecca Shaw has all kinds of lists. What she does when she's looking at updating a retention schedule is she tries to figure out who all of the stakeholders are. She emails all of them, which can be in the thousands of records officers.
Provo City.
It would be Amanda. Yeah. Janine also probably would get those. And if it's the PD, there are actually a couple, and that's who these are. These are the records officers for the different sections. But yes.
Proactive.
She emails and, yeah. She sends the proposed one to them before it's actually changed. And she says, what do you think of this? So she tries to identify stakeholders and send it just to those. She doesn't send out a blast to every single records officer. But like when she did the financial schedules, which by the way took 2 years, their financial schedules, and everybody was a stakeholder, right? But she did send that out to thousands of people, and then she actually held a records officer focus group, invited all of those stakeholders actually to come be a part of a discussion in person about what the new retention should be for financial records. And we've done that for attorney case. We actually got attorneys to agree, and I never thought it was possible, to be honest, because it was state AG's office, as well as municipal, county. We got them all to agree on retention schedules. It was amazing. So she does these focus groups. So there are ways you can be involved. And if you're not a records officer, but you want to be on her list, you just let her know. Because she loves feedback. Because it's almost like she's creating them in a vacuum. I mean, she does the research she can, but if she's not getting feedback from the people actually using the schedules for their records, then she's really just, it's almost blindly doing it. You use logic, you use research. Compared to other states, she does all of that, but she's got to have some feedback. So yeah, it's a good question.
We're on the IT
yeah.
side. So we're always concerned about the changes to how electronic storage will work. How it's
Yes.
people understand what's possible there.
Right, and how does this actually apply in the electronic world? Because the same retention schedule applies to both electronic and paper, but how? Like, how does that look? You too could be a records officer if you get appointed by the right person. She's like, shut up. No, you can get on those lists though. Rebecca Shaw would be happy to. She's always, and actually that perspective would be really valuable as well. Especially, she was doing law enforcement records a few years ago, and she just could not get stakeholders to weigh in. You know, she was doing what she could. She approved them, and then at a conference presented them, and she got yelled at. I was standing next to someone who called her a something something, and I'm like, hello, people. And she said, I would love your feedback. Leave your email here. And she got one person leaving their email. So this is the way it is in developing laws, too. If you want to say, you have to show up. So she's happy to have you on that list. So this is, I just wanted to point out, if you guys have questions, call or talk to your records officers. These are your records officers. So Janine, and I know she's passing the torch to Amanda. Big nods over there. Rebecca Gurr for PD, I'm assuming that's how that's, and then Angela Gelbreth. That's not you guys, is it? Okay, just checking. So those are the records officers for the police department. Fire department is Amanda, but also Alana. It's been updated. So we need to be updated. That would be great. That's one of the reasons I put this up there. I'm like, I'm not 100% sure this is accurate, but this is the data we have. So they'll tell me and I'll update that. So who's the new one for fire department? Carrie. Welcome. So Carrie. So these, and then Amanda. She's everywhere up there. But yeah, so this is who you ask if you have questions. They ask us if they don't know the answer. And that's because records officers are actually appointed to work with us. And so that's who we try to work with. And that way you have one person learning all the answers to the questions that you have, and you're getting the information consistently from one person, right? So we do prefer to work directly with the records officers. We don't turn people away. If you emailed us with a question, we would loop your records officer, Amanda or whoever, into the email because she needs to be part of the conversation. But really, we do prefer that you go directly to them and they become this awesome resource for you. So your responsibility, not as records managers, or records officers, excuse me, but as records people, creators and managers, etc. You just need to know what role you play in records management. Specifically, well, and also know that records officers can delegate responsibilities. And I don't know what your power structure is. Obviously, I can't give her authority to delegate within your city, but they can ask for help and should ask for help with inventorying, monitoring retention, boxing up records, transferring records, destroying and documenting, especially electronic records. I'm assuming she can't go into the database and just push delete whenever she feels like it, so she has to work. She has to delegate some of that. So those kinds of things. So your responsibility is to support them, be nice to them. Can I put that in there too? It's not in the code, but it's true. And then let's talk about transferring records, because she wanted me to have you know how to actually box up records and transfer them. So let's go over that really quickly. We're going to do an activity. So inactive records only should be transferred off-site. This is the State Records Center in Clearfield. You can use whatever off-site, venue you guys want and pay for, but this one's free. The state offers this for free. You do have to buy your boxes. They're $2.31 each. You have to get them from Office Depot because Office Depot made custom boxes for the Record Center, so that's why. Oh, thank you. I did think of that actually when I brought this. This is an actual Record Center storage box. So as I mentioned earlier, the custody is held by you when they're there. So if someone asks for that record, you have to request it to come back to your office, which happens within just 2 or 3 days, and then provide access. Let's see. Every once in a while, we have someone send the requester up to the Record Center. Like, go up to Clearfield and get the record you're asking for. No, we can't. This is a secure building. They do have tours available. If you are interested in a tour, it's really cool to see how things actually run. It kind of explains the why of all of these rules. No, not those rules. These rules. These rules. If you go up there and see their process, you're, oh, that's why I can't use labels. The labels dry and fall off the boxes. So you have to use a permanent marker and write directly on the cardboard. Well, you go up there, tour is a great way to find out the why behind all of the rules. So to transfer records, number 1, identify your record series number, because you can't do it without that. And if it hasn't been scheduled anywhere, if it's a unique record series and there's not a general schedule for it, it's going to take some time. It could be weeks, sometimes a month or two. It has to go to the State Records Committee, especially a couple months. So do that first. Make sure you have that record series number. Purchase the boxes from Office Depot. The details about that are on our website, how to do that, who to call, what to say. You have to go in the right order. It's crazy. Or else they can't find the item. It's crazy. Prepare and arrange records. So with that, I would say a couple things. Don't overfill the boxes. If you can't get your fingers inside on both sides and the handles, then neither will the people at the record center be able to. And they've got to be able to throw those things around. That's too violent. They need to be able to manipulate those boxes easily. They don't actually throw them, but pick up and move quickly. Sorry. So yeah, you have to be able to get your fingers in. That's kind of common sense, but you'd be amazed. Utah Highway Patrol is they're notorious for filling them to the point where you can't get your fingers in. I don't know how they move them personally, but anyway, so don't do that. Sorry, Utah Highway Patrol. What else do you need to know? Well, you've got to label the boxes, I told you, with a marker. We're going to practice that in a second. And then also you need to inventory. This is really key. You actually need to print up on paper an inventory of what you put in the box and put it inside the box. And then keep a copy of it in your office, but don't keep it on your own desktop and nowhere else, because then if you leave, nobody... I had someone from DEQ once call trying to find a box with a certain record, and record series has 1,474 boxes at the record center, but she had inherited a mess and nobody had given her an inventory of what was in any of the boxes. And all I had was the little tiny bit of descriptive information, which in this case I think was nothing. So I know, it was so sad, I have no idea what to tell you. You can recall them all. And go through them. I'm so sorry, the person in front of you didn't. So keep it somewhere where the next person can get it to, is my point. Submit the record sheet. This is the record transfer sheet. It's just an online form. You'll need to tell on there each box. You list each box. You can only do one record series per record transfer sheet and one record series per box. You can't mix record series in a box or in a record transfer sheet. So you list every box for that series that you're sending. You need to give them a date range, tell them how old those records are that are in the box. The more accurate you get with the date ranges, the more accurately they can calculate the disposition for you. Because we have some that stay there for years too long, because people do this really wide range for all of the boxes they send. They'll get, they stay there sometimes 15, 16 years too long because of that. So, and then arrange boxes. If you send enough to put them on pallets, that's the way they want you to do it, with the labels on the outside. And then arrange delivery. So that record transfer sheet goes to them. They'll contact you. If you're going to send more than like 20, 25 boxes, you need to actually schedule a day for that so that they can work that into their routine of the day, right? Every once in a while, they'll have like 3 or 4 people show up with large shipments, and they just can't process through that many people at once. So they just kind of want it to be staggered enough that they can make it easy for you. So let's practice labeling boxes. So you have some papers that are to simulate the box end. They look like this. So you guys are a bright bunch. I don't think that it will take long, but I just wanted to practice just a little bit. So I hope you can read the information on the sticky notes, but if that's what it said, how would you label that box? So go ahead and do it. Oh, and you don't have sorry, usually this is printed up in front of them too. So it's Governor's Office, their constituent correspondence. Record series is 13368. They're from March 2005 to October 2005. So one of the things you need to put on there, I didn't cover this, was an agency assigned box number. And sometimes people call and say, what box number should we give it? And really, that's up to you. I would say make sure it's unique, so don't just say one, box 1, box 2, box, because then you're going to have every shipment, you're going to have a box 1. So trying to go back and find that will be difficult. So yeah, make it unique. And it's good if it means something, and it's good if it can be consistent. So letting leaving a record of how you named them so that the next person can continue on. Okay, so how did you guys label this? Does it look something like that? Agency name, governor's office? Did I go too fast? Sorry. Yeah. The dates of what's inside there will go on the record transfer sheet. Some people do put them on the box as well, but I personally like to use them in the way that I name the box. Or you can use the date that you're transferring. If you're doing a whole bunch, like the whole years, at the end of the year, maybe 2017's ending, then you could do 2017-1 and go through the whole year, something like that. But yeah, the date of the contents, you don't actually have to put on the box, but you can. If you don't put it there, though, you've got to keep really good records everywhere else of the dates. All right, so next one, how would you label this box? So it says UDOT Permits Office. These are access permits, Series 25326. These are from January to June of 2005, and previous agency box numbers that they've used in the past. 03-9, this is for real, by the way, I looked these up. 03-10, 2004-1, 2004-2, 2004-3. So they haven't been totally consistent, but how would you label this box? What they were doing. No, you didn't. I didn't give you that sticky information. Yes, that was their numbering system, and that's kind of maybe the point I was making, is that we don't tell you how to do it, except we advise you not to do 1, 2, 3. Well, it's like HR, the whole state is one department. They have to do like they started doing something like corrections, right? Dash whatever. Okay, so how did you guys label this one? So it looks something like that. Good. All right. Let's do just a couple more. Let's do this one. This one. This is a real one too. Okay, Carbon County School District School Board Minutes, Series 25888, January 2009 to December 2012. Previous agency box numbers 1994 to 97, or 1997, 2001 to 2003, 2004 to 2007, 2008. So they actually used the dates in their box numbers. They just used that range as the box number going through, which can work. I mean, they were sending multiple years, and then they weren't. All right, you getting it figured out? You guys are going faster, I can tell you. So that's how I did it. Yeah, that's how I did it, because I was trying to be consistent with how they numbered them. So. Oh, this one's fun because look at those box numbers that they used. So yeah, that's why I put this one on here. How would you label this one? Utah State Tax Commission, Division of Motor Vehicles, so the DMV. We all love them. Vehicle registrations, Series 7186. These are from January through December of 2010. Previous agency box numbers are 02MVM05MM. 03MVM05MM. What does that mean? Anyway, sorry. interesting. I think, so my guess, this is my guess, based on the number system, that the one in front is the box number, and then the 05 was the year. So they only sent one in 06, so there's just one box number. 0107 for the next year, 0108 for the next year, right? But in 05, they had 4 boxes, so there was a 0205, 0305, right? But it's a bit of a puzzle. Anyway, so it's good to leave behind some documentation. So we're almost done. I'll just move. Oh, so that's how I named that one then. I may have made that up. I don't know. This is the last one I put up there, the state AG's office. Formal opinions, 1997 to 2012. There's no series number, and I'm kind of out of time, but do you want me to show you how I found the series so you guys know how to look up a series? Or do you guys feel like you already know how to do that? You want me to? Okay. All right, I'm going to take over the computer for a minute, if that's okay, Amanda. So this is why I left this one on here. I'm sliding, but not very well, thank you. No, that's okay. Okay, all right. Sorry, this is your business here. I don't know what I'm going to be pulling up, but
Any browser, and I'll put your mic for you. Oh. And then when you're ready, just slide this over here and I'll display it up there.
oh, I'm on the wrong screen. Okay, I see they weren't seeing that. That's always good. Oh, sorry, on my computer, all I have to do is, okay. So our website is archives.utah.gov. And then, depending on how wide the screen is, this is responsive design. So if you make it wider, it looks more like this. So records management, retention schedules, and if you remember, on the right are the series-specific ones. So we were looking up Attorney General's office, right? So I actually would probably go to A, unless it's under Utah Attorney General's office. Attorney General's office. What else did it say on that box thing? Formal opinions. So that's probably going to be right under the big kahuna here. Opinions. Look. Opinions formal and opinions informal. And there is our record series number. Series 7191. Okay? All right, so can you do that? You'll be faster. Okay, so that's how you look that up. And then just one last point is about destruction. We kind of talked about it a little bit, but oh, so there you go. Well, anyway, you don't need to see that. So destroy records is necessary. Couple things. Retentions are not just a minimum. The law actually says, and there I gave you the citation if you don't want to believe me. All copies, what the law says is that agencies shall retain and destroy according to the retention schedule. This is really, really difficult with database records. And I know that, we know that, right? But that's what the law is, so that's what we tell you. And as you're designing databases, choosing new ones going forward, keep in mind that you need the ability to go in and destroy records. Yeah, I know. Somehow, and I'm not saying everybody needs the ability to, but there needs to be a way to get into the database and actually purge information.
But if that data is just not
retrievable. Can you prove that it's not retrievable? If the court's asking for the records, can you tell them? Yeah. Yeah, so I understand what you're saying. So what I'm telling you is what the law says, and that the law was made before electronic records were made. So maybe, about the same time, maybe. But that as you're making decisions going forward, being aware of the need and how it can protect your agency to be able to actually destroy and prove that you've destroyed data. according to retention schedule. So, however that looks for you guys, I understand that I know this is pie in the sky, and that you have to figure out for yourself what risks you can take and what you can't, and then invest where you need to. So all copies of a record should be destroyed at the same time as a record copy or before, regardless of format. And that's the law. So there you go. I know it's a hard one. We know that. Tips for managing destruction. Establish a routine, and it sounds like you kind of have one already set up to some extent. Assign responsibilities clearly and document in a destruction log. I've given you a sample destruction log, and the other sample I gave you, it's the very back of your packet, is an inventory sheet for a box. They're just samples. It's just a spreadsheet, but just so you have an idea of what information you want about what's in a box, and then what information on a destruction log. These can be really helpful. They can protect you. They can make your life easier when you get a grammar request to be able to say this was destroyed on such and such a day according to this general retention schedule and by this person, right? You do delay disposition for a few reasons. If there is an ongoing investigation that involves the records, if there is a reasonable expectation that they will be necessary for litigation. That's the law. That's what it says, reasonable expectation. Or if there's an official litigation hold, that one's kind of easy to know. And then GRAMA, if there's a pending GRAMA request, or if they're being used in an audit. Or if you have a really bad feeling about destroying them because you think the retention schedule is wrong, then contact us and discuss it with us. You know, we don't want you to go against your gut, but we also don't want to just leave that out there. So, do you have any questions? Yes.
On the requirement for potential litigation, is that just based on because you've actually heard rumblings about it, or you just see like this is a hot topic, so I've got to keep it just in case?
I would say I'm not going to interpret the law for you, not being your counsel. But that's probably what I would advise is go to your counsel and say, the law says if there's a reasonable expectation that this record will be needed for possible litigation, so you know something's coming, don't destroy it because you can get in trouble. That's kind of what they're saying.
And that I understand. It's just the issue of you may have a record that's 10 years old and you haven't heard anything about it, but you know it was a hot button topic at the time. Is the law, you know, need to be an attorney, but
Yeah.
they interpret it as, yeah, you should realize there's a reasonable expectation that this could come up.
For appeal or something. I would just say if you have a question, I mean, that's a pretty specific situation. That's going to be the outlier, right? Then I would get advice before destroying it. Actually, that's not a bad idea. And the other thing is then you have to ask, does this actually document agency history? I know that's crazy. I'm throwing this wrench in there. But those hot topics, the general schedules that we put together for attorney case files, we actually have one for high profile cases now. So even if it's a civil or criminal, high profile, we want those permanently. So I don't know if it had anything to do with a case, but just if.
There's no appeal case.
Right. In your scenario, I was there with you, man. I was right there. Okay. Yes.
So while you have not only provided temporary storage facility, but then the permanent storage facility in which you then take ownership of the record long term, is there any accommodations for electronic record at this point in time?
So the permanent, yes. Permanent records that are electronic, yes, we take those. And we take them with both hands. Eagerly. We are eager to get those. We are so worried about losing we're going to have a huge gap. We're worried about having a big gap in the history. During this period of transitioning from paper to electronic, and how do we get these records? And we're worried about that. So yes, we'll even take them before the retention is up, if that's necessary.
Do you have workflow or protocol regarding how you engage in that behavior?
Yeah. Speaking of transitioning, right? We're hoping someday to have it as easy as downloading it online, but securely, obviously. But right now, we don't have that yet. So we do various things: external hard drive, back and forth thumb drive. But then you have to be so careful depending on what's on there. If it's sensitive information, it needs to, and we don't like our records to come to us encrypted necessarily, because then we have to unencrypt it right then, or else people will never be able to get it, right? So we actually prefer unencrypted on a secure transfer. But anyway, so we can work with you depending on the situation. That's where we are right now. And we're getting records of all different formats and from different agencies. So we do have a document about preferred formats that I could give to you if you email me. Oh, yeah. Heard City Bird format. I'm like, well, that's what I've never heard of. Yeah, CD Bird. Yeah, and actually we use M-discs. I don't know if you've heard of those, but they're like CDs, but you etch into rock layer instead of just on the plastic layer, and so they are supposed to last a millennia. So they're millennium discs, but you have to still have a CD reader. But we do use those right now for a lot of our stuff, so that would be a good way if you had them. But yeah, so we can talk more about that.
How does one document that the state posts to destroy something?
The general retention schedule is the state telling you to destroy something.
No, so like if we have a question, you respond back, like we get that.
Oh.
Store that, and then how long do we store that?
Are you saying this would be something not covered in a retention schedule, or you're saying that you called for confirmation?
Confirmation. You're supposed to write down.
On the destruction log, you mean?
Yes, but do we include attach
Seems like you could just say, yes.
What we started doing in the recorder's office is we just take a snapshot of that record series, and then we list all the documents that we're destroying underneath that record series. So that record series is there, it shows what documents, and then we list the documents that are destroyed. Does that answer your question? So we have documentation and proof that that record series could be destroyed.
So are you saying you take a picture of the retention?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then list all the records underneath it that we are destroying according to that record schedule.
Did that answer your question, or are you saying special? Okay.
I can actually show an example if you want.
So this one happens a lot, where we show up into a new position and you find files of copies from 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And RFP would be a great example here. There's a copy of an RFP used for the internal use, but not through purchasing, we open the record.
Right.
How do you handle the destruction of that record at that time? Do you have to fill out a form, or can you just destroy it? You are not the main record.
So you could take it to the records officer and let them make that call. The retention schedule gives you permission to destroy it. So that's not really the question. It says, do we need to document it? I would take it to the records officer and let her make the call. If she was aware anything still existed, then she would really need to know. But if she was not aware, then she could say, oh, good, we got rid of a copy that I didn't know was around, right? So then she's aware.
Or the copy didn't exist and that was the source you might do that.
Right, when it makes her aware of whatever and so then, that's kind of tricky. Okay. This is an example.
This is just a quick example of some of the grant applications and information that we've destroyed. I've had in our vault, we have hundreds of grants. And so we've just been taking the time to go through them and destroy what we can and keep what we need to. So that's just an example of a destruction log that we'll keep, just that lets people know that those records have been destroyed. Interestingly enough, destruction logs have a retention schedule. So
I'm done. Last couple things I forgot to say is take these out of boxes and put your records in manila envelopes, because the metal can go through boxes and no 3-ring binders, so that was all. I'm good, done. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Kendra. That was very, very informative. We really appreciate it. We've got only about 45 minutes left, and so please help yourself to food, water, anything back here, but I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Rosemary Cundiff. Rosemary is amazing. She has such institutional knowledge, and she kind of grew into this position, didn't have any idea when she started with the state that she would be eventually the ombudsman. So for the records and grandma requests. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Rosemary. She knows everything about grandma requests. She loves them. And so this is another area that's really important. Now that we know our records retention, which is important now, how do we release these records, and which records do we release and which don't we? So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to her.
Yes. So I've been at the archives for 17 years, and in 2011, do you remember House Bill 477? The legislature made some changes to grandma, and there was public reaction to that, and so they formed a committee to study grandma and make recommendations, and one of those was to create an ombudsman. So I became the ombudsman in 2012. And my role is to, first, in the law, it says to understand grandma, and then to provide assistance to requesters. Anyone who's making a grandma request, they can call me and I'm to help them with that, or to help records officers or governmental entities who are responding to requests. So I spend a lot of my days on the phone answering questions from government or from requesters as well. And then another part of my job is to mediate disputes. So if there is an appeal or a dispute about records, then I can bring the parties together and we can talk about it and try to come up with a resolution. So actually, could we look at the archives website for just a minute? I have a PowerPoint presentation about grandma, and it would take me a good 3 hours to talk about all the slides. So I'm not sure exactly what you want, what your questions are, what you want to know, but I'd like to just briefly show you the archives website and click on Open Government. Yeah, let's look at the Open Records portal. So I heard Janine talk about, oh, Amanda. Okay. I heard Amanda talk about the Open Records portal, and this is supposed to be a central location where anyone can make a grandma request. So someone would go onto this portal and choose an entity type, like let's choose cities and towns, and then type in Provo and request records. So then they would create a login and send a request to Provo City, and this is pretty new, but as things, this gets broadcast more, it will pick up and more people will look at this. So can you go back to Provo again? And maybe. So another thing we're doing with this site is putting records online. So we're trying to link to various records that are already online. So there you can see the budgets, general plans, ordinances. Click on one of those and see if that brings you back to that little tile. Should bring you back to the ordinances on Provo City's website. So we're trying to populate these, commonly requested records if they're online, so that the public can have access to them and they don't need to make a grandma request. That's the idea. So, yeah. Then can you go back one more to the archives website again? And there's an ombudsman page. And so that's where I have posted things that I think would be helpful about grandma. There is the thing that Kendra mentioned about drafts. So what is a draft and all the details about drafts. There's just other resources there. Also, there are forms there. So there's my ugly picture, but if you scroll down, you can see records laws, state, local, there you can link to the ordinances about records for all of the municipalities and counties and so on. And can you click on forms? So there's, that's for the public, grandma request forms, but there's also some for government, so that if you are denying a grandma request, it's really easy to go there and print a notice of denial and fill that out and send it back, and that way you don't have to craft a letter, something you know that you've given them all the information that they needed if you filled out the whole form. So now I'd like to ask, since we have only 30 minutes to talk about grandma, what are your questions? How many of you have responded to a grandma request? What was that like? And what are your questions about grandma? Because the law's quite a few pages long and quite complex. So, anybody? Yes.
There are times when we get a grandma request for disciplinary action against officers or
Mm-hmm.
or like internal investigations or different things like that. And because that's not a crime report or something like that that we maintain,
Right.
is that actually something that they can request of grandma, or do they have to request that through a different avenue? Because a lot of times they'll request it and they'll say, okay, I want the disciplinary action or reprimands written up on officers for 2016, all of them in 2016. So, I mean, is that something our department handles, or does that actually go through HR? Or does that, because that's more of their employee record, right?
Okay. So Kendra talked a lot about what is a record. And so it is a record, and so they can request it. I mean, the public can request anything. They can request anything. And so you would first decide if it's a record, and if it's a record, then the next step is to decide who gets, well, yes, for you, who handles it. So how you're handling who responds within Provo City, I don't know the answer to that. That would be a, so, right. So let's, can you go back to my PowerPoint presentation, and we'll just work through a few things. I wish that I had a copy of the law for all of you. I don't, but the first section of the law talks about the legislative intent, and it describes two competing interests, if you will. So government is supposed to be transparent, and the public has the right to know information about government. But at the same time, government collects information about individuals that's private. And so the purpose of this law is to, on balance, figure out who should have access, when to provide access and when not to. When does one of those interests outweigh the other? And here's some facts about the law. It's Utah's Basic Records Law. It's comparable to FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. But the legislature also said in the legislative intent that it recognizes that there is also a public interest in restricting access to information. So going back to your question, if there was a complaint against an employee and there was an investigation going on, would it be judicious to publicize the details of what's happening in that investigation?
Well, I'm sure as long as it's an active, ongoing, it would be considered a controlled record.
It would be a private, I mean a protected record. Right.
One that's not releasable
Right.
at that time.
That's correct. That's correct. So we have private records that are about individuals, and we don't release those except to certain people. And we have protected records, which are like the investigation, that we're protecting government processes, so we don't release those. Then we have controlled records and public records. And then there are records that are restricted by some other statute, such as HIPAA or FERPA is another one for school records. And there's the traffic code, which governs who gets access to traffic accident reports. And so there's all those layers. But so this law is designed to answer all those questions. And when it comes down to it, there's a lot of discretion, a lot of things that aren't clear in the law. So you have to kind of think about the situation at hand and figure out how you interpret it. Yes?
So how do you find out if your record is private, protected, controlled, all that? Is that what the legal department does, or is there is it part of the schedule?
So
Or is it?
in the law, I'll tell you what the law says. Every governmental entity is responsible to classify their own records. So who's doing that within Provo City is, you know, for you all to decide. But you can't call the archive. I mean, you can call me and I can show you places in the law, but it's your decision. It's your own decision. So
And that would be different from department to department, yeah. Right? Yeah.
could be. Right.
HR considers protected and what we consider protected.
So just to review, there's 4 classifications. There's public, right? And there's private, about individuals. And protected is protecting government functions. And controlled is medical records and psychiatric records that we're not going to give to the person that the record's about, right? So if you get a request or you have a question about a particular record, then we can go to the law and there's a list of the following records are public. This is great. Yes, I like this. So 301 is public records. Let's look at that list. And I hope I can. But you can look on this list and see the following records are public. And number 2, laws. So B is the name, gender, and gross compensation and basic information about government employees. Their names, their qualifications, their job description, how many hours they worked, and so on. So you can look at this list and see which records are public. And they are public to the extent that they don't have any confidential information in them. But 301 also has another list of records that are normally public. And so anything on the second list here, like administrative staff manuals, instructions to staff is an example of one. And even though these are normally public, depending on the situation, depending on exactly what it is, there might be another classification that overrides that public classification. So that's why they're called normally public, not always public. So if we...
Example of that?
Yeah, go down to number O. O, records that would disclose information relating to formal charges or disciplinary action, which you asked about, is normally public. But then it qualifies it. The disciplinary action has been completed and time appeals for administrative appeal have expired. The charges were sustained. So up until all of those things happened, it's not a public record. And even after all of those things have happened, it's still normally public. That means you would have discretion to say it's private or protected or something else. Yes?
So on that, we generally, it seems like we don't think about what a record is until someone's requesting one. And it's like, well, is this a private record or
Yes.
mandates on whether or not you have to do that ahead of time?
Yes, there is, and it's right in the law. And if you go back one, and this might take. Let's see, duty to evaluate 307. And it says a governmental entity may classify a particular record or record series or information at any time, but are not required to classify any record until it is requested. Can you see that there? So you can wait until you get a request, then you get the request and look at the record and figure out how you're going to classify it. So let's go back and look at private records. Classification and 302. So here we have a list of private records and information. So everything on this list is private. And look at number B is records that have medical history or diagnosis or treatment or any kind of medical information about somebody. That's private, and it's always going to be private, no matter where you find it.
Yeah, but that also falls under control, right?
It can.
I assume control is this is terrible to say, but the crazy person one, the person who you don't want to see their own medical records, that's an example of it.
That's the difference. So for private records, the person who is the subject of the record can have access.
But a control.
If it's a controlled record, you got a crazy police officer, for example. I know you don't, but but the chief of police wants a psychological evaluation on this person, and so they do that, and they get the results, and we have a psychological evaluation, and that person asks for that record. Are you going to give it to him? No, because it's a controlled record. And so controlled records are limited only to medical records and psychological records that you're not going to give to the person that it's about. Okay? That's it. That's the only thing. Yes, Kendra?
Sorry, isn't part of that though that they've decided that there's harm if they do give it to them? I mean, is that always true that you would never give a psych evaluation to the person? Or is there some decision discrepancy?
Well, the law says that if giving the information to the subject could be detrimental, or also if it's a violation of professional practice. And so, you're going to follow professional practice as well. So, yeah, here's the controlled records. That's what they are. So, yeah. So in going back to the list of private records, there's also...
I find it interesting in G.
Yes?
If you look at G, it talks about employment records that would show their home address, their telephone number, and yet in the public records, their job descriptions and their salary and those things can be released.
Right.
But not the personal information about that employee.
That's right.
So it kind of is two of them. It covers unemployed, and
There's...
if grandma request comes in for an employee, some of the information you can release and some you can't.
That's very well said. So here you can see number G. There. All employees' home addresses, home phone numbers, social security numbers, insurance coverage, marital status, and payroll deductions are all private. And there isn't an exception to that. So if you scroll down on the private records, there's a second list, and this list is private if properly classified. So it's kind of like that public list. These are things that are usually private, but there can be exceptions. So in particular, I guess what I'm saying is not that there can be exceptions, but you have the discretion to override, to do something different, right? So, number D is particularly important on this list, and this is records containing data on individuals, the disclosure of which would be a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So, I think it wouldn't be possible to consider all records and all things that could be private and list them. And so, since you have to have, I guess the important fact is that you have to have a reason in law to restrict access to any record. So all records are public by default until you can find a reason in the law to restrict access. So this provides a reason in law for you to restrict access to any record that you feel would be an unwarranted invasion of privacy if you released it. So, can you think of some examples? Yes.
So we were just questioning about that, whereas with employees, okay, you wouldn't release their address and that stuff. But in some instances where we get a request for a report and if the suspect in the case is the victim's stalker,
Uh-huh.
so I would remove the victim's address, like all of their information, because we don't want this person having their address. But normally we wouldn't remove any address.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. But let me come back to that one too, okay? So, yes.
We had a police report, a request for a police report. The case was closed, if I recall, so ordinarily that would be used. But it was redacted because there was one of the persons that police talked to revealed their HIV status.
Yes.
So it could be highly stigmatizing in addition to letting people know about the medical condition.
Right.
So that was redacted before it was released, even though it was in what was mostly a public record.
Very good. So one question, I get a lot of questions about, is this public or private, when it isn't mentioned in the law at all. And one of them that comes up quite a bit is utility usage. So, is it private information how much water or electricity a household uses? No?
Consumption is not private.
I would assume that it's not. There's nothing in the law that says.
The bills and things, those, the dollar amounts are private. But not the actual usage and payment history.
Payment history? Okay. So what I'm pointing out is that since that isn't mentioned any place in the law, you would come to this particular statute and use that if you believe that that information is a clearly unwarranted invasion of privacy. Okay? So people might have to, if you decided that, that might be a different decision than another city decides, but it's your responsibility and your discretion to do that. Okay? So let's take a look at the protected records list for a moment. So there's 65 different things on the list of protected records. And so remember, these are restricted because it's in government interest to restrict access. Okay? So let's look at number 10. Going down to number 10. And this is the one that protects investigations or audits or disciplinary action or all those things. Records that are created for enforcement purposes, discipline, licensing, certification, investigation. All of those records are protected until that process is complete, whatever it might be. And then look at the next one, number 11. So this is records, the disclosure of which could jeopardize the life or safety of an individual. And so that comes back to your point. You could use this classification if you feel that releasing that information could be harmful to someone. Okay? And then let's look at number 17. This is a common one as well. So attorney-client privilege. And if you have email or correspondence between you and an attorney who is your city attorney, then that communication is protected to the extent that you're discussing legal matters, and it's not just a personal, invitation to lunch or something. So it has to be an attorney and a client and a discussion about a legal issue. Then, let's see what else. Number 22 is interesting. Drafts. So drafts are protected records. So Grandma wants to protect the deliberative process. So as long as we're working on something, we're discussing it back and forth among each other within the city, then that remains protected until it becomes a final product. Let's look at number 32. What is that? When city council goes into closed session, the minutes or recordings or everything that has to do with that closed session is also protected, so you won't release that. Okay, and let's look at number 51. This is the name, home phone number, not the name, but the home phone number and address of any individual. If they were required to provide that by law or ordinance, they were required to provide it, then it's protected and you won't release that. So those are some highlights. But so when you're thinking about classifying something, then you have to go to the law and look at the lists and figure it out how you would classify it. So do you have any questions about the classification? Okay, so let's go back to section 2. Access to records. So this 201, which I said already, says that every person has the right to inspect a public record. It says the right to inspect a public record free of charge and the right to take a copy during normal working hours. So as long as the record is public, then everyone has the right to access it. And it doesn't matter who that person is, or if they're obnoxious, or why they want it, which is kind of hard sometimes. So, and then the next point is one that I already mentioned, that every record is assumed to be public unless there's a reason in law to support restriction of access. And then, what else do I want to point out here? It talks about that a public record is everything that isn't restricted, which is kind of the definition. So, number 8 is also interesting. So, can grammar requests be obnoxious and time-consuming and troublesome and burdensome and all those things? Yes. Yes. How many grammar requests do you think Provo City gets a year or a month? A lot. A lot. So this list is the things that you're not required to do, right? So it's trying to help that burdensome issue. But in response to a request, a governmental entity is not required to create a record. So if they're asking for something and you don't have that record, you don't have to create a record in order to satisfy their request.
number two, that you're not required to compile them, then how do you get them? How do you get them to them?
Right. You're not required to compile or format or manipulate or package or summarize or tailor information. So you don't have to go and create a spreadsheet or pull things together, or if you have a record, you give them a record, but you're not required to compile things, right?
So I think a good example of that part is the request that we worked on just a month or two ago. You sent us all the information and Janine created a spreadsheet, not because she had to, but because she is so kind.
Because she is so kind, right. Not, so let's look down at the end of number 8, and it says, well, still in number 8. So this says you're not required to, but then look at number B, and it says, upon request, a governmental entity may provide a record in a particular format if, and after that, if you have time without interfering with your duties, and if the requester is willing to pay for it. So, I've seen governmental entities deny this based on they don't have to compile a record. It's, we're busy, it's too much work, we can't do it, and you can do that. But I think that most records officers do a lot of compiling and summarizing and all that, just because they're nice, right? Right. So another thing you're not required to do is to fill a request if it unreasonably duplicates a prior request. So if they have requested something last month and they're requesting it again this month, then you don't have to keep filling that request over and over. And what else? Number 8. Another point is that you don't have to fill a request if the record is available in a publication or online. If it's a request for ordinances or minutes or something that's posted online, you can just refer the person to the online source and you don't have to fill that request. Okay, so
Very vague and wrong.
I want all of the emails from the mayor to all the city council members for all of last year.
Yes.
Those requests actually happen, right? So that's very broad, but you still could identify it, right? So the response to that is you would be able to charge a fee for the time that it would take to do all that, and so you would estimate how much that would be. Yes. And so you would estimate how much that would be and let them know and if they want to pay for it. Right?
Is the state really still based on the individual's salary that has the skill to do it, or is there some other updated format to what we can charge?
Okay, that's in number 203. So,
You're impressive, but you just know why that's what
oh, yes.
With those broad requests, it costs the governmental entity to even make an estimate for it.
It does.
So can we count that as that free quarter hour making the estimate?
I would think you could. So here it says that that's where the hourly rate comes in. So when you compile or manipulate or all those things to records, it says that it's the hourly rate of not to exceed the salary of the lowest paid employee who is capable of doing that job. Yeah? So if the IT person or the attorney is the only one capable of doing the job, then it would be their salary, right? Yeah. So the highest I've seen is someone authorized $10,000 to fill a request. So, some people are willing to pay. So let's look at number 4 for a minute, since we're talking about fees. Which says that a governmental entity may waive the fee and is encouraged to do so if filling the request benefits the public rather than a person, or if the individual requesting the record is the subject of the record, or if the person's rights are implicated in the record and they're impecunious, meaning they don't have the funds to pay for it. So, how many of you, do you waive the fees ever? Lots, yes. Mm-hmm. So that's a guideline on waiving fees, and it's still permissive. There's not a requirement for you to waive fees. Because if they're writing a story, that's benefiting the public. It's getting information out to the public, and therefore it's benefiting the public. So you're encouraged to waive those fees. Right. So what else is there about fees? Hmm? Of course. So up at the first one says that a governmental entity may charge a reasonable fee for the actual cost of providing the record. But then down below, number 5, it says that you can't charge a fee for reviewing a record to determine whether it's subject to disclosure or inspecting a record. So it kind of, how do you balance those? Let's look at 204 for a minute. 204 has all of the details for responding to grandma requests. So if you get a grandma request, you have 10 days to respond. Number 2, it talks about the different ways to respond. Our response is either providing the records or providing a notice of denial explaining why you're denying access, and that would include the citation that you're basing that denial on. Or if it's not a record you have or that you've destroyed it according to the retention schedule, then you would respond by saying that. If it's someplace else, you would give them a referral. And finally, you can respond by letting them know that there are extraordinary circumstances. So the law goes through 8 different extraordinary circumstances, one of which is it's a voluminous request and I can't process it in 10 days, so I need more time. Or you have a lot of requests, or you need to consult with an attorney to figure out how to classify it. Those are a few examples of extraordinary circumstances, and the law tells you in each of those cases how much extra time you get or what you should do. So those are listed there. There's far more here than I can talk about.
What if it means that it's like one of those very broad, vague grammar requests, and you're just not able to process it because it's just so broad and vague? So you reply to them or asking them, I need you to narrow it, or I need you to.
That's a good idea, yes.
So that would still be considered a response to that request within the time frame in which their original request came in. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense, and I would say yes. But there's also another point. Go back to the number 1. So a person making a request shall furnish the governmental entity with a written request, so it has to be in writing, and it has to contain their name, address, phone number, if available, and a description of the record that identifies it with reasonable specificity. So if there isn't any reasonable specificity, you could say this doesn't qualify as a grandma request. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, yeah. Does that make sense? So what if you get it wrong on classification? What if you decided to restrict access to something and the requester does not agree with you? What happens then? Yes.
Is that when we would file an appeal on the request?
Yes. So that's the check. You know, if we decide that the amount that someone's paying for their utility bill is a private information, and we're using that unreasonable invasion of privacy to cover that, and the requester doesn't agree, then they can appeal. So anytime they don't get the records that they want, whether it's a denial or you failed to respond or whatever, they can appeal. And the first level of appeal is always the chief administrative officer. So the chief administrative officer of Provo City, which would be either your mayor or city manager, it's defined, so that person would then get the appeal and would have 10 days in which to review the request and your response and make a determination. So in the law, the chief administrative officer also has the weighing provision or the right to determine that a record is properly classified, but that there is enough public interest in releasing it that they're going to override a proper classification. But if the chief administrative officer upholds your denial, or the records officer's denial, then what happens? Then the requester can appeal to the State Records Committee. So the State Records Committee is supported by the State Archives. It's a 7-member board that's appointed by the governor, and so the Records Committee executive secretary will schedule a hearing, and then Provo City or whatever governmental entity will come and defend their classification, defend their position, while the requester or their attorney or whomever will come and explain their position, and this committee of 7 people will listen to both sides and make a decision and issue an order. So the State Records Committee meetings are open and public, and they're on the second Thursday of every month.
Are there fees associated with that?
Absolutely. So if unreasonable denials of fee waivers can also be appealed. Right, so it can just be about money. So, you ever had any experience with the State Records Committee or with the appeals process, any of you?
I have
Yeah. What was your experience? We're out of time, but would you care to comment about it? I'll let you.
I mean, I think the committees handles itself very professionally. It's the process itself is a very good experience. I think on the whole, they handle tough questions. I don't always agree with their decisions, but that would be true with any adjudication. And you always have the option of appealing their decision if you really think you can't live with it.
That's right. And I go to most of the hearings, and sometimes I'm just like,
Make your computer easier to use. Windows will read and cancel.
so, and we're out of time, but does anybody have any last minute questions? Yes. That they were transported. To see if that. I think that's a question that you would have to answer internally. Right. I would think that if there was a litigation hold or something, that the attorneys would notify you instead of you having to respond and track something down because you think. So are there any other questions about grandma? You guys just love grandma? Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, you guys. And as you can tell, Rosemary knows the law inside and out. It's like, go to number 5, go to number 12. And I'm going, whoa. So thank you. We are going to send out an email to each and every one of you with a link to the certification pages. And we just encourage you each to take the test. It's an online test. It's an open book test. And it really helps you understand both grandma and records retention by taking these tests. So we'll send you a link, and I encourage you to take those. And thank you.
And if anyone would like to talk about IT electronic stuff, please get with me. I'll happily discuss those things with you. How to request electronic records, etc.
Make your computer easier to use.